I awoke in this field, or rather, a hole in the ground. Calling my new home a cave would be generous at best, seeing how the thing is a shallow-ish concave bowl dug into the base of, at least what I think is, either a large hill or small mountain, almost like the site of a fresh meteor impact, just smaller. Getting a rough guess is all I can do, given the lip of my bowl does a surprisingly good job at obscuring my view outside. I guess I left out some important tidbits of info. Let me backtrack for you a bit. For starters, I'm leaving these notes carved into stone tablets mostly for my own sanity at this point. But I keep telling myself it's for posterity's sake. I have been here for 2 weeks now, and it doesn't look like anyone is ever going to read these but me, provided there is even anyone out here. Second, I'm not in my own body. I was a specimen of fine physique and stature, enlisted in the UNAF. That is the United North American Federation Marine Corps. More specifically, I used to belong to MARSOC. I'll skip the history lesson, and even though I'm pretty sure by the fact the sky is green, I'm no longer bound to my non-disclosure of OPSEC materials and information. I don't particularly feel like reminiscing over the good old days of being a field engineer, setting up rows of landmines and stringing up so much concertina wire, it'd make an armor regiment cry. What I do feel like discussing is how I went from 6'4", brown-haired, thick-bearded, and blue eyes to this crystal. I'm now just an octagonal cylinder, orange in color with white globs lazily drifting to and fro my ends. Like a lava lamp, just more expensive looking. And I'm about the size of a Twinkie. God, I miss snacks. I don't know how I know I'm this glowing rock, but I have an intense feeling of self when I look into it, similar to staring into a mirror. I'm not sure how I'm conscious either, let alone able to see, think, and feel. I can feel everything inside my little pit, from the slightest vibration of a gnat, entering my bubble all the way up to a small tree that fell over recently into my home after a pair of wild animals uprooted it. I have no idea what they were, but it sounded like a mix between a horse and a large cat. I've found over the last few days I can manipulate the stone and gravel around me, able to make it disappear and reappear and shape it like clay. I spent my entire second day making a chess set out of large pebbles and playing against myself, so I wouldn't have to think about my current situation. Games were always a good way to relieve stress after a long day. Then again, so was shooting a few hundred rounds down at the range on base. Cleaning the firearm was enjoyable too. I have, or at least had, a couple bachelor's degrees in mechanical and electrical engineering, and I was taking general classes on things like chemistry. So seeing the inner working of anything mechanical was always interesting. I don't see that being of much use right here, though, now that I'm dead. At least I think I died. I'm not exactly sure, but if I am still alive, then this is one wild dream. I was setting up a tank trap in a moderate wooded bottleneck between two steep rocky cliffs, only way in and out of the area short of a heli, and then all I can remember is the familiar crack of being downrange of gunfire, and just nothingness. It's hard to explain the absence of color and light, but I wasn't seeing just black. It was like every imaginable color and no color all at once. Complicated. Anyway, the marksman must have been a hell of a shot given that I didn't feel a thing. Kevlar helmets just don't cut it anymore against high-powered rifles. But I digress. I haven't been able to absorb the tree yet, mainly because it's still alive, fading slowly, but alive. Weird that I can feel its life draining away and it tastes like a watered-down wheatgrass smoothie. Yes, its life energy or whatever it is called tastes like wheatgrass, but only like a wisp of it. Like someone yelled, "Wheatgrass," from inside the latrine across the barracks from you while there was something loud outside, you know? I've also found that if I focus hard enough on a subject that I'm confused about, or lack information on the knowledge just illuminates in my brain, like when you can't remember a word, then out of nowhere, it hits you. Kinda reminds me of a light bulb blinking on above my head like in an old cartoon. I know how to do all these things. Amazing things that feel like they would be more at home in a fantasy story or some web novel I used to read as a kid. And they feel natural like breathing. I just have to remember that I apparently know how to do them. Well, now I'm just rambling, and this tablet is almost out of space. I guess I should finish up. This almost feels like playing a very realistic, extremely complicated VR simulation, similar to what we had for training just without an instruction manual, no orders, and no pause button. It's been a week since my last stone tablet. I've been up to a lot lately, and I figured I might as well write it down. Even though since coming here my memory seems to be perfect, providing I can remember to remember the thing I want to remember. I can recall everything down to the most minute detail, like how that fly over there with a chip out of its left wing, and flies with a slight curve to the right from overcompensation, and is now dying close to the edge of my bowl, has entered and exited my little field of influence 37 times over the last 13 minutes. It's just been zipping back and forth seemingly aimless as flies often do. but it's now slowly beginning to ebb and wane. It tastes like chewing on a dry sponge. No volume, but it fills up your mouth, and there's nothing else of real value to note. Thankfully, it doesn't taste the way I'd imagine a fly would actually taste. In other news, I got bored with my mundane surroundings and decided to spruce my home up a fair bit. I am now sitting upon a stone pedestal made of a tightly twisting Celtic lattices in the center of a room that I connected to the surface with a shallow, angled staircase that goes for almost 30 feet and then dug into the wall towards the mountain, opening a hallway into an okay-sized room, maybe 15 feet wide and long with 8-foot ceilings. I know it's a mountain, because I finally found out how to move my point of view. All I needed to do was focus on feeling like I'm floating and imagine there is a breeze pushing my view around whatever direction I need to go in, and the stronger the wind, the faster I move. I can't quite get close enough to the lip to see over into the surrounding area. However, I can see the tall stuff like a few trees in the mountain. Other than the obvious perks of building a bunker under a mountain, I had a very deep instinctual pull to build towards it. The mountain makes me feel safe. So very much more safe than laying among the pebbles with open sky above me. I decorated the walls and ceiling with Celtic knots and accents wrapping up from the smooth rock floor, weaving and flowing seamlessly together, then back apart until they reach a column in the center of the ceiling where they spiral downward in a double helix and wrap around meeting the edges of my pedestal, forming a loose cage around me. I don't really know why I decorated with Celtic designs. Maybe it's because I had a sleeve tattoo full of them, and I enjoy the way they look. The knots, basically all of them that aren't my pedestal, are an inlay of common lowland oak, and it gives a very pleasant contrast between the polished gray-white-black of the granite. Don't ask me how I know what kind of tree it is. I just knew its name and general composition after I consumed it. It seemed kind of cliché at first, but who am I to argue with the magic matter manipulation powers? Not to mention I'm a glowing talking rock. Suddenly, knowing and understanding the general makeup of a tree after eating, it is hardly the strangest thing that's come to light for me this month. Speaking of wood, since I've learned how to make and manipulate it, I don't have any real limit as far as amount goes, and I'm assuming that's the same with stone. I've easily used 10 times the amount of wood in the ceiling alone, compared to what I got from the actual tree. The only thing slowing me down is that after materializing a fair amount of materials, or just manipulating the matter around me in general, even writing on this tablet, after a while, I just hit a hard stop, and all at once I felt like I had just done a 12-mile ruck in full battle rattle at the time, and then promptly black out for a short time, after which I feel right as rain. I'm not sure if this is good or bad. Probably not a good thing if I have to hazard a guess. This has happened a few times, but each time when I wake up, my crystal glows with a glossy look, and the lava lamp globs are vigorously galumphing between my two ends. Compared to when I'm on the verge of passing out, it's almost a completely matte orange with no glow, and the white lava lamp globes virtually stop moving. I wistfully ask myself what exactly I am while staring intently at my gemstone, and to my surprise, a little line of words popped up. So now I have a HUD, I guess. There's not much to it other than putting a word or three above things I focus on. It's not so much a group of text as it is an orange mist that I can read, I guess. It's almost like I'm looking at words. But if I focus on the mist, it disperses, and when I return attention to the thing I'm trying to examine, it reappears almost like subtitles where you don't have to focus on them, but you can still read them. But it's all in my head. Yeah, I'm terrible at explaining things. Above me, the mist says I'm a level 2 unnamed rare dungeon core, which is odd for a number of reasons. Primarily for me, maybe not the most important. I'm level 2, which in itself raises lots of questions like, how do I gain levels? Is it XP based like most games I played in my past life? Or is it just a time-based thing? When did I hit level 2, I never got a notification or any innate feeling of growth. And what the hell even is a dungeon core? It says rare, so does that mean there's common and uncommon dungeons? What makes me rare? I just had to open this can of worms without a pole to fish with. Also, I think I might stop writing these tablets. It's just wasting energy, and I should probably keep myself in tip-top shape from now on. Knowing me, I'll probably start doing it again out of sheer boredom eventually. I look around my sanctum. At least, that is what the mist tells me it is when I look at the doorway. I wasn't able to put up a door, which is typical of the whole dungeon trope. I guess if I'm a dungeon, then I can't exactly lock myself away, where nobody can get to me. I mentally shudder after I think that that fly earlier didn't die in my home. It died in me, along with all the other insects that have been crawling, flying, fighting, and dying in that shallow bowl outside. It could explain how I got to level 2 gaining 1s and 2s from the bugs and spiders just living their lives out front. I try to push the thoughts out of my mind, but that would also explain my apparent fascination with Celtic knots. If the whole dungeon is my body, then I'm just giving myself a giant, very complicated tattoo reminiscent of the ones on my old body. I idly shake my head at the idea, or at least the mental equivalent of shaking my head. That just seems like a whole level of thinking that I don't want distracting me at this moment. Telling myself I'll mull it over later, knowing full well I'll probably forget. I turn to the door going outside and get back to the task at hand, beefing up my defenses. Currently, I only have a single room, so I start with hollowing out a corridor in the wall opposite my stairwell until I no longer have any room up against an invisible wall keeping me from progressing. I guess I have a directional boundary dictating how big I am, and if where I was laying in what I could now consider my courtyard would be the center. That gives me an area roughly the size of a basketball court, give or take, and almost half of that is outside. At the end of my new hallway, I begin to hollow out a room to the right, but if the glow of my core is to be any sort of warning, or rather, the lack thereof of any glowing would mean I'm close to my limit for the time being, and I'll have to wait. Hours have passed, and I'm looking more like my shiny self to pass the time I was playing chess again. The pieces are so small that moving them costs such a small amount of energy, I can't even tell I'm using any. Either going to sleep accelerates my recharge rate, or I'd been under longer than I'd realized when I did black out. Maybe I'll find out one day, but now that I'm charged back up, I can continue construction on my new room. I widen it out into an oval shape, and without thinking, add the embellishments of the Celtic knots and ropes wrapping around intricate stone lattices, giving the room a warm feeling atop the drab granite. Now, done with the basics, I carefully unwrap the cage from my pedestal and anchor myself to the stone pillar by sinking the bottom quarter of the gem into the stone. It would be a shame to drop and shatter myself into 1,000 pieces before I actually got to do anything with this life. After uncaging myself, I wrap my core in a coil of stone, anchoring myself to the pillar even further while still keeping the feeling of claustrophobia at bay. Perhaps I'm being a little paranoid, but this is nothing compared to how I encased myself in a reinforced granite case about the size and shape of a car tire to roll myself into the first room before thinking of a pillar. Fully encasing myself was nauseating, and it cut off my ability to sense anything except the immediate foot and a half-ish around myself, and most of that was the inside of my stone wheel. I couldn't tell how far I had rolled and overshot the room, slamming myself into the far wall, which is when I devised the pillar idea. The base of the pillar simply moves through the stone like dragging a knife through snow, and I simply fill in the space behind it with fresh stone. There are downsides, of course. If I move it too fast, the thing cracks, and the first time I nearly cleaved the pillar in half, trying to go more than a snail's pace. Slowly migrating myself atop my pillar to my new, soon-to-be sanctum is a nerve-wracking experience, even though there's no bumps or jostles. Maybe it's just the act of moving in general since I ordinarily can't. Something about it just puts me on edge. With the pedestal slowly making its migration down the corridor, I turn half of my attention away to start building what I can in the first room, my reception hall of sorts, and what kind of dungeon would I be if I had no traps? I'm somewhat surprised about how little I feel about possibly killing people here, but then again, I caused the death of a fair number of others in my old life. Not that I particularly enjoyed doing so, and thinking about it now, there is a subtle but unsettling hunger in the back of my mind. Of course, here I'm not so sure everything will want to kill me or break me or if there's even people. I take a long piece of wood and draw it out thinner and thinner until it looks like a long, thin hair almost unnoticeable in the dim lighting, and I string it across the doorway, one end secured seamlessly into the side of where the door jamb would be, maybe 3 inches off the ground. Perfect for someone to step on coming off the stairs. The other end I string through a pinhole I made in the other side of the doorframe and lead it upwards. I begin to dissolve a rectangle chunk of granite, leaving a sizable indent where I place a newly formed wooden log, tapering down the sides and attaching 2 dowels at the top on a pair of deep stone hooks making a crude hinge. At the end, I round off the log, giving it a mace-like appearance, and hollow out the center of the head, filling it with granite for weight, and attach the end of the hair-thin tripwire to the back end of the now suspended cudgel. A simple mechanism. Break the wire and the mace drops. I will be the first to admit that I was wholeheartedly expecting the impossibly thin strand of hair like wood to not hold the weight of the hanging club, but to my utter surprise it held, in fact, a little too well, and I was worried it wouldn't snap if someone walked into it, but I'll just have to see. I guess I'll just chalk that up to whatever the hell is going on in this world that allows me to shape and manipulate solid granite like some magic stone fairy. To test it, I manually cut the tripwire in the middle and watch as the cudgel swings downwards through the center of the doorway and out into the stairwell. The hinge is completely silent, even though it's made of unpolished stone and wood, which is another plus. I don't, however, think this trap can actually kill anyone. It would hit me in the chest if I were standing in the center of the doorway with my old body, and quite possibly break a couple ribs, but that's about it. I'll have to add some spikes or something later, but for now I just reset it and mend the tripwire so it stays poised for any intruders who aren't expecting anything from the get-go. About 5 feet from what the mist named a common simple gravity trap, I begin preparations for a second trap, a pitfall I plan on concealing with a paper-thin layer of stone seamlessly cut into the floor. But I return all of my focus to my core, which was about 3/4 of the way to its new room after an idea struck me. I won't block myself off physically per se, but it seems that as long as there is an open air connection to the outside world, I should be fine. I start hollowing out a small shaft in the left wall of the oval room at an angle going up steeply, maybe just big enough for a scrawny kid to fit, and this shaft continues upward almost 20 feet before hollowing out into an 8-sided room with a flat ceiling and floor to mimic how my core looks. And of course, before I'm able to enact my plan, my energy runs dry. Only this time I was not paying attention to myself, only making sure the pillar didn't stop moving or tip over. The world was washed out by darkness and the feeling of static. When I came back around, I was not quite topped off on energy. However, my tripwire was broken, and it sent off alarm bells streaking through my mind like lightning. I turned my consciousness to the entrance, and to my surprise, there was no man or woman delving into my first room. It was, however, a giant ant. If I had to guess, it was about the size of a medium dog with its mandibles splayed wide and locked, and cautiously moving past the sudden movement from above where the mace swung at empty air. Every few moments it would tap the ground or vibrate the air with its antenna, eventually relaxing its jaws as it no longer felt threatened. It was a giant trapjaw ant, and if I had boots, I would be shaking in them. This thing looked mean. Its carapace was a pearlescent white, almost like staring at a marble and bone statue with mother-of-pearl inlay, and its eyes and wings were a deep, fiery amber that reflected streaks of blue-green, like someone wiped a thin veil of oil on them. The ant's 4 hind legs ended in sharp dual hooks that made climbing anything that wasn't smooth a breeze, and its 2 forelegs had hooks as well, but they were slightly longer and segmented, like its legs, allowing it to grasp objects in a menial way. I saw for the first time as it wrapped a hair-bristled claw in a circle around its antenna and began wiping dust off of them. I focused on the creature waiting for the mist to show up, and it was taking a lot more effort than usual to get it to appear. I kept pressing until a word popped up in the forefront of my mind. Another light bulb. Discern. I read the word out, and my vision blurred. I began making out words, and finally, after a small struggle, the text appeared in the mist. Female dire antellate, rare, unfertilized. After reading this, I mentally blinked, trying to get the feeling of water out of my eyes, and my vision was enveloped by a deep gray-blue haze when a flood of information began filling my mind. Dire ant. This colony-based predator is known for its strong bite with paralytic venom it can inject through its mandibles, and its minor psionic powers, along with the striking variations in color they can be found in. Colonies, also called nations, can form in a few months, and if left unchecked, can swell to vast numbers. No 2 colonies are exactly the same with exception to the brown dire ant, which is the common ancestor to all dire ant breeds and is the most prevalent among the ant nations. All subspecies of dire ant are able to crossbreed. This beast holds a spark of intelligence and knows not to overhunt its local area, else it would starve itself, so it farms a specific fungi in vast chambers to feed the bulk of its numbers and avoid overhunting of local prey animals. A female elate, or princess, will take a clump of mycelium on its nuptial flight to seed its own gardens. This creature is well suited to mining and can dig through solid stone by gouging out rock with its extremely durable mandibles and the help of an acidic sulfuric compound. It excretes from its abdomen, able to weaken or outright dissolve most common stones, but is unable to break down crystallized rock such as volcanic glass and gemstones, which are mined manually by workers and tributed to the royal pair. The queen will use these to adorn her chambers, along with royal silk. The acid is expensive to produce, and is generally never used offensively aside from few uncommon subspecies. Other than the queen, only larval stage ants are able to produce silk. Silk produced by the queen is stronger, fire-resistant, and waterproof, whereas common larval silk is still strong, but will absorb water over time, becoming weaker and is not fire-resistant. During a nuptial flight, the new elates will spread out hundreds of miles to form their own colonies. Princes will go out in search of females ready to mate by forming gangs of 3 to 20 individuals, and gangs will coalesce into swarms of hundreds. The princesses will dig out a nest or locate an already formed cavern, then release pheromones, signaling a willingness and readiness to pair, and then wait for a gang or swarm of males to find and court her. Unlike mundane ants, the new king won't die immediately afterwards. Instead, they will stay paired with the queen until they die. The average natural lifespan of a king and queen pair is 25 years, not including unnatural deaths due to violence, disease, or weather. The queen will take care of the nest and brood, while the male, being more expendable as the queen only needs to mate once in her life, will go foraging looking for food and dry wood to start their fungal garden. These ants are known to form strict borders with their neighbors after establishing themselves and will participate in border disputes and full-on wars for territory and resources, as well as trading with other nations after evolution. After finding a suitable nest, the colony will grow until it is able to produce majors, shortly after which the queen and king will undergo evolution, becoming bipedal and vastly more intelligent, showing the initial signs of sentience. And as the colony grows, they will gain more and more knowledge from their ancestral memory until they reach an intellect equal to that of most humanoid races. The whole colony will undergo this transformation, and then they will search out a nascent colony of dire ants to turn into beasts of burden, war mounts, and hunting companions, very similar to humans and wolves or orcs and wargs. Subjugated colonies will never evolve past the addition of majors due to the pheromones from the evolved colonies subduing their own. They will, however, begin to develop more specialized majors for both work and war. Unlike mundane ants, both male and female ants will be born showing minor sexual dimorphism. However, common drones will be sterile. The colony will only produce elates after evolution, and only if the colony is stable and healthy. New male and female elates will be born devolved to before their evolved state to avoid the stresses of founding a new colony. However, they will still be smarter than unevolved common drones. This specific subspecies of dire ant is a chameleon weaver variant, able to mimic its environment using chromatophores in its translucent carapace. In the absence of light, its color reverts to a pale white. All members of this subspecies retains the organs necessary for producing silk after leaving adolescence, and will utilize it through their everyday lives. This species is primarily diurnal, commonly sleeping through the night or staying inside the colony in hours of darkness. I finished reading and was mildly perplexed. I didn't get a paragraph of info when I looked into myself, but maybe that's because I'm already supposed to know about myself, or maybe I didn't use that discern thing. Was that a spell or skill of some kind? At least this confirms that there are humans, and orcs apparently and other humanoids. Does that mean I can come across elves and dwarves at some point? This is beginning to feel more and more like I'm in some kind of twisted fantasy story, more than real life. I turn my attention back to the ant princess, and the realization dawns on me. The light bulb flashes on again, and I instinctively know I can claim this creature for my dungeon. Following the feeling, I force my energy into tight, twisting, metallic-ish band that when I look deep enough into it, I can see myself beautifully swirling vortices of energy like evening sunlight caught in particles of mist. I snap myself out of my mild trance and continue melding this energy into a shackle of sorts. The ant harmlessly passed over the unfinished pitfall I started and continues its curious meander through the room until it finds the hallway. I'll have to finish that pitfall sooner rather than later. I muse to nobody, kicking myself for leaving myself unprotected. About halfway down the corridor, I'm beginning to get nervous. This thing is getting closer and closer to my sanctum, and in the excitement of finding something in my home, I had forgotten to finish moving my core. Terror floods through me, and I fervently work on the binding, pouring as much energy as I can into it, feeling myself dropping dangerously close to the cusp of passing out. The ring is now showing the Celtic detail I've absent-mindedly etched into the entirety of my domain, like a theme I can't help but bend to. The ant is now in my sanctum, and there's another flood of terror, then anger, and then finally grief, as I am powerless to stop this monster from doing whatever it wants to me. And then nothing happens. At least nothing bad, I think. The thing beelined for me, and I thought it was going to eat me or crush me, but instead, it just lightly tapped me with its antenna circling the pedestal curiously, and then tried to wrap its little clawed fingers around my core, almost like it was petting or cleaning me. The feeling of being touched was interesting. I would get flashes of intent every time contact was made, mostly in the form of single-word thoughts or feelings like home, safe, nest, friend. To my great relief, it gave up, but that last one really caught me off guard. I'm not sure how I feel about being asked by a giant ant if I wanted to be its friend, but that's better than being turned into food or used as an adornment for its throne. Do ants have thrones? The dire ant settled back on the floor and began its tapping and prodding around my sanctum, mapping out every last inch of the ground and peering up the entrance to where I would be moving my core, but didn't go any further. Instead, it turned back and stopped next to my pedestal, and just dropped its underbelly to the floor, spreading its legs outward. Not even her antenna twitched, which was odd, given that they were almost always moving and they began to sag a bit, leaning towards each other until they were crossed and gently ground against each other, creating a soft chirping akin to a cricket, only much quieter and less harsh. If I had to guess, she was asleep, or whatever an ant's equivalent to sleep is. I finished the binding ring over the next couple hours, taking breaks to allow my mana to build, and took a good look at it now. It was an intricate amber-orange band in the shape of an octagon, cascading intricate knots, winding their way around and across its surface, and they moved lazily in a single direction as if they were all a single long snake slithering endlessly. It had a striking resemblance to an ornate dog collar, even complete with a loop to attach a name tag and leash. I almost felt bad using it on the ant, as it was almost friendly with a temperament to my first dog, a red bloodhound named Cardinal, but it didn't seem to stir from its slumber, not even a twitch in its antenna when the intricate ring disappeared into its head, and an octagon in its likeness embossed itself into its carapace over its abdomen, complete with Celtic outlines and inlays in a deep amber orange that pulsed in sync with my core. I went back to the first room and disabled the swinging cudgel for now by disconnecting the tripwire and fusing the cudgel straight into the ceiling. I know that she can't fall into the spike pit because it isn't built yet, but I don't want her accidentally killing herself with the cudgel. I'll have to reimagine the traps at some other time to be completely ant-friendly. Turning my gaze into my sanctum, I now focused on my new friend. She was stirring in her sleep, dreaming, and I was able to peer into her mind. It was odd. Not really any real intense thoughts, but it was more put together than the individual words and feelings from earlier. The most prevalent being a sense of admiration and the phrase, "I'm home over." Looking into a dream, I saw vivid details of caves and passages and a large cavern filled with large hanging spheres of silk suspended from the ceiling, sprouting more soft blue glowing mushrooms that have flat, irregularly round caps and flat tops, bathing the cavern in a soft light akin to moonlight. Silk rope bridges crossing between them and ants navigating the tightrope lines, expertly milling from one sphere to another, gathering mushrooms into small silk bags while spores drift through the air. All of the farms connect to a thick silk pillar in the center of the room, forming a highway of sorts where the ants pass off their full bags for empty ones to return to their fungal orchards. This wasn't just a wild animal. She had feelings which I guess lent itself to the tidbit of info from earlier stating how they are mildly intelligent. She was cognitive and aware, and I was going to have to think of a name for her, but I already had one, didn't I?